and other gains also in the formal politics. This is a very interesting community, and today is even more interesting than 20 years ago, 24 years ago. I have been visiting other neighborhoods in the city. Let me say, for example, Sunset Park in Brooklyn. And Sunset Park is also a very diverse community. And you have Puerto Ricans, all Puerto Ricans. You have Dominicans, you have all Dominicans, all immigrants Dominicans. And you also have newcomers. You have Colombians, you have Salvadorians, and you have Mexicans, the majority. What happened there? Did I actually observe any kind of unity the same way I did in Corona 24 years ago? No. This is a very fragmented community. Very fragmented community. Well, the last to come to the United States, Mexicans are the target of all kind of insults and things that you do, against a group. And you have witnessed in the news that some Mexican has been attacked by Hispanic, Puerto Rican or Dominicans. And that's very interesting to see. That's what I said when you talk about Latinos, you open a Pandora box. And I would like to know, what are the explanation of that? And I'm talking about the community formation. I'm talking how these communities actually are created. Can you explain that? Can you put actually in some theory, in some conceptual theory, the timing of migration, the locality, diversity, differences, representation, agency, political agency, community organizations, the grassroots of the community, into one explanation how Latinos community are constructed. And I've been thinking about that for some time now. And I can find this unified concept or theoretical framework to explain the development of each community. And I believe until we don't find that, we're gonna be talking about different community in New York City. Washington Heights isn't equal to Sunset Park. Corona Elmhurst is not Sunset Park. East New York is not Sunset Park. El barrio as it is today is not none of these neighborhoods. So the Pandora box opens when you have all these elements that come out, like emerge, and you don't know how to control them. And I'm going to leave that to you. Probably we can discuss that later when we finish here. Thank you.
Okay. Today, 200 years ago this evening, Padre Hidalgo walked onto the balcony and shouted the grito that set off a process that would end in Mexico being freed from Spain. This would have been a holiday of significance only to a tiny number of people in New York, probably not much beyond the Mexican embassy to the United Nations, not all that long ago. But today, Mexicans are the third largest national group in New York. An amazing thing, really, in the rapidity with which it happened. So happy bicentennial to those of you who are marking the holiday. And this is also the centennial of the Mexican Revolution in this same year, a significant event that sent many hundreds of thousands of Mexicans north into the United States and created communities that exist to this day. I say that by way of introduction of Paul Berman. His contribution to Hispanic New York is called Mariachi Reverie, and includes some of the only scholarly writing that I've ever seen about volver. The wonderful old chestnut that if you liquor me up enough, I will do a fairly good rendition of. Paul Berman is a writer on politics and literature whose articles and reviews have appeared in the New York Times, the New Republic, the New Yorker, Slate, the Village Voice, and many others. Paul Berman.
First of all, congratulations to Claudio on putting together such a tremendously valuable book. My own contribution to it, yes, is called Mariachi Reverie. I will leave it to Ray to perform the song. But I would like to use the occasion now to embark on just a tiny little reverie, which I touch on in my essay. And this has to do with not the present age, not 50 years ago, which we're dimly remembering now, but the long ago past. Maybe 15 years ago, I wrote an article in the New Yorker magazine about the single text that could be regarded as the ultimate American national text. I don't think everybody would agree with that view, but many people would. Ultimate text in the field of literature. And this is and was Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Whitman lived in Brooklyn, and he finished the first edition of Leaves of Grass in 1855. And at the time that he finished that book, he was living, well, the scholars have known kind of where he was living, but they didn't know exactly where. But some 15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago, together with the Princeton historian Sean Wilentz, was able to, the two of us were able to identify exactly where he was living. And it was an address on Ryerson Street in Brooklyn near Myrtle Avenue. And we established the exact number. I went to the place and discovered this building is still there. It's covered with aluminum siding, so you can't possibly recognize it as a really old building, but it is the old building. And the street has changed totally, sort of. We have a description of what that street looked like in 1855 because a friend of Ralph Waldo Emerson went there to meet Whitman, wrote back to Emerson saying it was very far from New York, which it still is, if by New York you mean Manhattan, and that it was a street full of what were called mechanics, which is to say a working class street. And it is exactly that today. Population has changed maybe a little bit. In the building where Whitman finished the book, now was living an electrician from the West Indies who had, in his day gig, in his night gig, was to be leader of a reggae band. And down the street were all kinds of workers in this or that field, including a Nicaraguan family who'd come a few years before from Leon, Nicaragua. People like that. So in a certain way, you could say the city had changed entirely from Whitman's time. But then again, if you read Whitman, you can see that it hasn't changed at all. Because Whitman was already aware that New York and his version of America was a place of many identities, leading to what he called in a little essay, which Claudio has reprinted, a composite identity for the United States, which for Whitman was a project in progress, a work in progress, and it is still a work in progress. Now for Whitman, the composite identity of his own time already included the Spanish, because if Whitman's great, among his many great contributions, was to invent an English all his own. It's unlike anybody else's. It's out of the King James Bible, it's out of certain Quaker languages, but it's also something that he just completely invents. Some of it from the New York streets, some of it from the New Orleans streets for a little while, and part of it is in Spanish. So if you read Whitman, you discover in a poem like Broadway pageant that he suddenly breaks out